When you stop explaining yourself to a narcissist, when you finally go silent, that silence doesn't make you weak, it makes you powerful. Because nothing terrifies a narcissist more than the sound of someone they can no longer control. Silence exposes the narcissist's inner emptiness and loss of control. It's remarkable how something as simple as quiet can dismantle a person who thrives on manipulation and chaos. The narcissist builds their entire identity around control. Control over how others perceive them, how others react, and how others feel. Every word you speak, every emotion you show, becomes a mirror they manipulate to maintain that illusion of superiority. But when you go silent, when you stop feeding that illusion, it begins to crack. Because silence removes their script. Without your reactions, they lose the very stage upon which their false self performs. For a narcissist, silence is not neutral, it's threatening. They interpret it as rejection, as defiance, as loss of supply. Their sense of importance depends on your participation in their emotional drama. They need you to respond, to justify, to defend, to argue, to cry, to beg. Each reaction tells them they still have power over your emotional world, but silence denies them that. It's like holding up a mirror with nothing reflected back, and suddenly, they're forced to confront the void they've been hiding from their entire life. That void is unbearable to them because it exposes what they truly are: hollow, fragile, dependent on external validation for survival. When you choose silence, you strip them of the control they've built their world around. They no longer know how to manipulate you because there's nothing to grab onto. Their words lose weight, their tactics fail. They try to provoke, to guilt trip, to play the victim, anything to pull a reaction from you. But when you remain still, calm, unresponsive, it's like watching their mask slip piece by piece. They can't stand being unseen, unacknowledged, or irrelevant. The silence you maintain becomes a mirror reflecting their deepest fear, that they are nothing without control over others. This is why silence feels so powerful. Because it's not passive, it's intentional. It's not about avoidance, it's about reclaiming your emotional space. It's about saying without words, I'm no longer available to play this role in your story. The narcissist depends on emotional chaos to maintain their illusion of significance. They thrive when you're confused, reactive, and desperate for resolution. But when you stop engaging, you remove their oxygen. You give them nothing to feed on. That's when the panic sets in. They'll lash out, twist narratives, and accuse you of being cold, heartless, or manipulative. They'll do anything to break that silence because it's unbearable to them. But that very discomfort is the truth revealing itself, the truth that their control was never real, only borrowed from your energy. Silence also reveals something to you. It shows how much power you truly have. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who's never listening, you begin to see how much energy you've been giving away. You start to realize that peace doesn't come from convincing others to understand you, but from understanding yourself deeply enough that you no longer need their validation. The narcissist's rage or confusion in response to your silence only confirms that you've disrupted their illusion. They don't fear you, they fear losing the mirror that makes them feel real. When you step into that quiet, you reclaim your mind. You stop being part of their chaos. You see clearly how every manipulation was designed to keep you emotionally dependent. And the beauty of silence is that it gives you back something they could never offer: clarity. It forces both of you to face reality. For them, it's the emptiness they've been hiding. For you, it's the strength you've always had, but forgot existed underneath all the noise. Withholding reaction becomes your greatest act of power because it's the one thing the narcissist cannot control or predict. They thrive on emotional responses: anger, frustration, tears, explanations, because each reaction reinforces their sense of dominance. Every time you argue, defend, or try to make them understand, you hand them the emotional leverage they need to manipulate you. They twist your words, distort your intentions, and use your emotions as weapons against you. But when you withhold your reaction, when you respond with calm indifference, it disrupts their entire strategy. They're left without ammunition, and that sudden loss of control threatens the very foundation of their identity. The narcissist's power lies not in who they are, but in how you respond to them. They feed on emotional energy. The intensity of your reactions sustains their illusion of importance. That's why they provoke, gaslight, and create chaos. They want to see you emotionally unravel. Your pain reassures them that they matter. But when you stop reacting, when you maintain composure even in the face of manipulation, it's like cutting off their lifeline. You become unpredictable, and unpredictability is something they cannot stand. Their control depends on your emotional patterns. When you break them, you reclaim your power. Withholding reaction doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means mastering them. It means choosing to respond with intention rather than impulse. It's realizing that not every insult deserves acknowledgement, not every accusation requires defense, and not every provocation needs attention. This restraint isn't weakness, it's strength. It's a deep, quiet strength that says, you no longer get to dictate how I feel. The narcissist may interpret this as arrogance or emotional detachment, but in truth, it's liberation. You're no longer a participant in their game. You're observing it from the outside, detached, aware, and in control. When you refuse to react, something profound happens. The narcissist starts to expose themselves. Their tactics become more desperate, their words more exaggerated, their behavior more erratic. They may oscillate between rage and charm, insults and praise, all in an attempt to pull you back into the emotional storm. But your calmness acts like a mirror reflecting their instability. The more composed you remain, the more their true nature reveals itself. And in that revelation, you see the emptiness behind their power. Over time, withholding reaction becomes more than just a defensive strategy. It becomes a way of living with intention and awareness. It teaches you to stay grounded in your own truth, to trust your perception of reality without needing validation from chaos. You begin to see that real strength doesn't need to shout or prove it stands silently, unwavering, and self-assured. By choosing not to react, you communicate a powerful message without saying a word, that your emotions, your peace, and your energy are no longer for sale. True silence is not weakness, it's discipline, strength, and self-respect. It takes immense inner control to hold your tongue when every part of you wants to defend yourself, explain, or fight back. The narcissist thrives on that need for reaction, on your urge to correct the lies and prove your worth. But silence, when it comes from self-awareness, breaks that entire cycle. It's not passive submission, it's active mastery. It's the recognition that your words will fall on deaf ears, that your emotions will be twisted, and that peace cannot exist in a conversation designed to dominate you. When you choose silence, you're not surrendering, you're stepping out of a game that was never meant to be fair. That kind of restraint is a mark of deep emotional maturity. It means you've learned to regulate your impulses, to sit with discomfort without being consumed by it. It's easy to yell, to argue, to demand to be understood. That's what the narcissist expects. They want chaos because chaos distracts you from clarity. But when you respond with silence, you deny them that chaos. You create a gap, a void, and in that void, truth begins to emerge. The silence becomes a boundary that says, I refuse to waste my breath explaining my worth to someone who's determined not to see it. That's not weakness, that's strength forged through self-respect. Silence built from self-respect isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about knowing which battles are worth fighting. It's the quiet confidence that doesn't need validation, that doesn't chase closure from the person who caused the wound. When you stay silent, you reclaim your dignity. You stop participating in emotional tug-of-wars where the outcome is always rigged against you. You understand that your energy is precious, that every response you give is a form of currency, and you're done spending it on people who only take. The narcissist reads that silence as defiance because, in truth, it is. It's the ultimate refusal to be controlled. What's powerful about disciplined silence is that it redirects your focus inward. Instead of pouring your energy into trying to change or fix someone else, you start investing it into healing yourself. You begin to listen not to their noise, but to your own intuition, your own values, your own truth. That's when silence transforms from a shield into a sanctuary. It becomes a space where you rediscover your strength, where you realize that not reacting doesn't mean you don't care, it means you care about yourself more. The narcissist will often try to frame your silence as weakness, as proof that you're cold or indifferent, but those are projections of their own insecurity. They mistake peace for passivity because they've never experienced real strength that doesn't need to dominate. True silence doesn't come from fear, it comes from certainty. It's the quiet of someone who knows who they are and refuses to let anyone pull them back into emotional chaos. The narcissist's fear grows when you no longer need their validation because their power has always depended on your need for approval. From the beginning, they condition you to seek their praise, to depend on their opinion, to define your worth by how they perceive you. They manipulate that dependency like a puppet string, alternating between affection and rejection, approval and criticism, until you're trapped in a constant state of emotional uncertainty. That's where their control lies, in keeping you desperate for their validation. But the moment you stop seeking it, when you realize you no longer need them to confirm your value, their entire foundation begins to crumble. To a narcissist, control equals survival. Your validation is their fuel, the emotional currency that keeps their fragile ego inflated. They need to feel superior, admired, needed. When you start detaching, when you stop caring whether they approve or not, it's like cutting off their supply line. They lose the ability to influence your emotions. They can no longer guilt you into compliance or shame you into submission. Suddenly their words lose power, their manipulation loses effect, and they find themselves facing the one thing they fear most: irrelevance. When you no longer need their validation, you shift the power dynamic entirely. You start making choices based on what's right for you, not what will please them. You begin to see how often your self-worth was tied to their approval, how often you sacrificed your own peace just to maintain their satisfaction. Breaking that pattern feels uncomfortable at first because they trained you to equate disapproval with danger. But once you experience the freedom of emotional independence, you see how false that fear was. You realize that your sense of value doesn't need to come from external praise, but from self-respect and integrity. This independence terrifies the narcissist because it exposes their irrelevance. They will test you, trying to regain control by switching tactics, suddenly offering affection, pretending vulnerability, or acting like they've changed. But it's not genuine. It's a strategy to pull you back into the loop of seeking their validation. When you see through it, when you maintain your emotional distance despite their attempts to reel you back, they begin to feel powerless. Their worst nightmare isn't your anger, it's your indifference. Because indifference says, you no longer have access to my emotions. That's a wound they can't tolerate. The moment you stop seeking their approval is the moment they lose their grip entirely. They can't manipulate what doesn't respond. They can't dominate someone who doesn't care to please them. And in that realization, their entire illusion of control falls apart. They're forced to face the emptiness that your validation once covered, and that confrontation fills them with fear. Your emotional independence is not only your freedom, it's their exposure. Peaceful silence marks the end of their control and the beginning of your freedom, because it represents a shift from emotional dependence to self-governance. For so long, the narcissist dictated the rhythm of your emotions. Their moods determined your peace. Their approval shaped your self-worth. Their chaos decided your state of mind. You were constantly reacting, trying to stabilize something that was never meant to be stable. But when you step into silence, when you choose not to engage, you end that invisible contract. You stop dancing to their tune. And in that stillness, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to hear yourself again. The noise fades, and what's left is clarity. That silence isn't empty, it's healing. It's the quiet that follows a storm, uncomfortable at first, but necessary for renewal. The narcissist senses this change and feels it as a threat because your silence signals that their influence no longer penetrates your mind. They can no longer provoke guilt or confuse you into submission. You've built an inner calm that doesn't depend on their behavior, and that peace is something they cannot control, manipulate, or destroy. It's beyond their reach. That's why they often react with anger or desperation when you withdraw. They interpret your peace as defiance because it exposes how powerless they truly are without your emotional participation. In that silence, you begin to rebuild your identity. You start redefining what peace feels like, not as the absence of conflict, but as the presence of stability within yourself. You realize that quiet moments aren't lonely, they're sacred. They give you space to breathe, to think, to reconnect with the parts of yourself that were buried under constant emotional noise. You begin to make decisions without fear, to act without second-guessing whether it will upset them. That's when you start living on your terms again. The silence becomes a bridge back to your own autonomy. Peaceful silence is the opposite of the chaos that once defined your life with a narcissist. It doesn't need to prove anything, it doesn't chase explanations, it doesn't seek closure. It simply exists as a declaration of independence. And while the narcissist may try to disrupt it with provocations, manipulations, or attempts to lure you back, you'll notice that none of it has the same power anymore. Their words lose meaning. Their energy no longer penetrates your calm, because peace, once internalized, becomes self-sustaining. When you reach this stage, the narcissist's control ends not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. They cease to matter in the same way they once did. You've reclaimed ownership over your thoughts, emotions, and reactions. The silence that once felt heavy now feels liberating. It's the sound of detachment, of freedom earned through endurance. It's not about punishing them, it's about choosing yourself. The silence becomes your new language, one that speaks not in words, but in unwavering peace that cannot be disturbed.